Uber gets hit with a huge fine for improper data transfer. Telegram CEO is arrested in France because of platform moderation concerns. U.S. tech faces growing challenges in China. All this and more on the It's a Mad, Mad World edition of #Trending. I'm your host, Jim Love. Let's get into it. We didn't plan it this way, but three of the major stories today emphasize how it may be a global marketplace, but companies of all sizes can face a huge number of challenges in navigating through regulations and increasing global tensions. Uber is facing a substantial fine of 290 million euros, approximately 324 million US dollars, from the Dutch Data Protection Authority, DPA, for violating the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. The penalty is one of the largest imposed under the GDPR since its inception. The violation centers around Uber's improper transfer of European drivers' personal data to the United States. According to the DPA, Uber failed to properly safeguard this data during the transfer process. The investigation was initiated after 170 French Uber drivers filed complaints with a human rights organization. The DPA found that Uber had retained sensitive driver data on US-based servers without using appropriate transfer tools. This data included account details, taxi licenses, location data, photos, payment information, identity documents, and in some cases, even criminal and medical records. The case highlights the EU's strict stance on data privacy and its willingness to impose significant penalties on tech giants that violate GDPR rules. It follows other high-profile GDPR fines, including a $1.3 billion penalty imposed on Meta in 2023 for similar data transfer violations. Uber plans to appeal the decision, stating that their cross-border data transfer process was compliant with GDPR during a period of uncertainty between the EU and the US. The company's spokesperson, Casper Nixon, called the decision flawed and the fine completely unjustified. Now, this case serves as a reminder of the importance of data protection and the potential consequences for companies that fail to adhere to GDPR regulations. It also underscores the ongoing challenges tech companies face in managing global data flows while complying with different regulatory regimes. In a significant development, Pavel Durov, the CEO and founder of Telegram, has been arrested by French authorities outside of Paris. The arrest has raised some questions about the responsibilities of social media platforms in moderating content and cooperating with law enforcement. Telegram boasts about 1 billion users globally and has responded to the arrest, stating that Durov has nothing to hide and arguing it is absurd to claim that a platform or its owner are responsible for abuse of that platform. French President Emmanuel Macron has emphasized that the arrest is not politically motivated but part of an ongoing judicial investigation. The warrant was issued by OFFMAN, a French agency dedicated to preventing violence against minors. Jean-Michel Bernagot, Secretary General of OFFMAN, stated that the core issue is the lack of moderation and cooperation of the platform, in particular in the fight against crimes against children. While this might seem like an overreach on behalf of the European regulators, even relatively lax regulations in the US wouldn't protect a platform if there is perceived potential harm to children. Section 230 of the US Communications Decency Act provides immunity to online platforms from liability for third-party content, and in most cases, Section 230 of the U.S. Communications Decency Act provides immunity to online platforms from liability for third-party content. And in most cases, social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube cannot be legally responsible for the content posted on their platforms. One major exception, however, is if they knowingly facilitate illegal activities such as child exploitation or trafficking. So this situation highlights the ongoing tension between platforms that prioritize user privacy and minimal content moderation and governments seeking to combat illegal activities online. Telegram has long been known for its secrecy and hands-off approach to moderation, positioning itself as a neutral platform resistant to government requests for content control. But the arrest has also attracted international attention, with the Russian embassy in Paris seeking access to Durov, who holds citizenship in France and the UAE, but was born in Russia. However this shakes out, it's going to have potentially far-reaching implications for how tech companies approach content moderation and cooperation with law enforcement in the future. And the relationship between U.S. technology companies and China is becoming increasingly complex and strained. Recent developments highlight the challenges companies face in navigating geopolitical tensions, regulatory pressures, and market competition. IBM has announced plans to shut down its research and development department in China, affecting about 1,000 jobs. This move comes as IBM faces mounting competition in the Chinese market, with revenues dropping almost 20% last year. IBM is going to have to do a bit of a delicate balancing act as it still has Chinese customers. But IBM's not alone. Earlier this year, Microsoft reportedly asked employees of it. But IBM is not alone, and there are reasons to think that government pressure, or at least the pressure of regulations of dealing with China, may also play a part in this. Microsoft reportedly asked hundreds of its employees in China to consider relocating to other countries as it looks to reduce its cloud computing and AI research operations in China. Others pulling out of China include U.S. venture capital firms who are pulling back from investing in Chinese startups, Apple, which relies heavily on Chinese manufacturing, is facing pressure to diversify their supply chains, and Apple has recently expanded its facilities in India. But it has to be remembered, Apple, which relies heavily on Chinese manufacturing, may face pressure to diversify their supply chains. Apple has recently been talking about expanding its facilities in India and other locations overseas. It has to be remembered that despite the saber-rattling about regulations and tariffs, recently about electric vehicles by both the US and Canada, who are trying to defend against bargain electric vehicles to protect their own auto industry, placing added regulations and tariffs on these goods may seem like a great political slogan. But with inflation being a huge concern in the US and Canada, it's unlikely that any government wants to drive up the costs of imported goods. Former US President Trump put tariffs on Chinese phone maker ZTE that makes high-quality but lower-price Android phones, but Trump quickly reversed that, claiming it was done with regard to his friendly relationship with China's leader Xi Jinping, but also probably under pressure for people who wanted the high-quality, low-price phones that ZTE is famous for. China does export a lot of what it makes, but there is, or at least was, a strong market for some U.S. technology, both in industry and a growing Chinese consumer class that was buying U.S. brands both for status and perceived technical superiority. While most AI chips are restricted, there are still semiconductor companies doing business with China who worry about losing access to the Chinese market, which could impact their bottom line and potentially accelerate China's domestic chip industry. Large U.S. companies like IBM, as we mentioned, large U.S. companies like IBM have Chinese customers. So China's not just a manufacturer, and China's not just a manufacturer of Apple devices. It has been a major growth market for Apple. But with tensions with the U.S. and export restrictions, China is trying to build its own products and put pressure on its citizens to buy those products. While the Chinese government officially denies any ban, government employees have been asked not to bring foreign smartphones, read Apple, into government buildings. At first, the ban was just for the federal government, but it has quickly spread to a number of states and government-owned companies and agencies. These developments reflect a broader decoupling trend between the U.S. and China in the tech sector. As tensions rise, companies must balance market opportunities against regulatory risks and national security concerns. But while China is frantically working on its own AI industry and offerings, it is still trying to buy U.S. AI chip technology. Ironically, a great deal of which is manufactured on the island of Taiwan, which China still regards as its territory. While the American government is attempting to bring chip manufacturing back to the U.S., it's not only to create jobs, it's also to ensure that its supply chain wouldn't be shut down by any conflict over Taiwan. China is frantically working on its own AI industry and offerings, but it is still, by necessity, trying to buy U.S. chip technology. Ironically, a great deal of which is manufactured on the island of Taiwan, which China still regards as its own territory. And there's a great deal of tension about that. The American government is attempting to bring chip manufacturing back to the US, not only to create jobs, but also to ensure its supply chain wouldn't be shut down by any conflict over Taiwan. Because even though they are struggling to become independent, at least in the short run, China needs American AI chip technology, which makes Taiwan an extremely attractive target, but an unlikely one as long as the US will help defend the island nation. So at least in the short run, there are a multitude of ways China is trying to circumvent restrictions. Most creatively, when it can't find other ways around export restrictions, China is reportedly trying to buy AI cycles from US cloud providers, where there are, at least technically, not yet restrictions. Both AWS and Microsoft have been listed on Chinese purchase offers, but it's not certain whether Chinese or its subsidiaries or related companies have actually made these purchases. But it's still a loophole, and US legislators are reported to be looking at ways to close that loophole. It's a complex relationship, and one that has major impacts on all our companies and their supply chains. And that's our show for today. You can find our show notes at our news site, technewsday.com or .ca. Take your pick. As always, we love your opinions, your suggestions on stories we should cover, or guests we should have, and even criticism. You can reach me at editorial@technewsday.ca. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a terrific Tuesday.